You are right on time for this week's Western Spectrum program that brings you issues that are affecting this part of the country, giving you a front seat to discuss issues that actually affect the people that reside in this part of the country. And of course, we will continue to do that, discussing various issues that cut across. You can actually be part and parcel of this conversation on our social media handles at KBC Channel 1 on X. You can also be part of this conversation on KBC Channel 1 on YouTube and also on Instagram and TikTok. But also, you can also catch this live broadcast on Mayenga FM digital platforms, that is on social media handles, that is X, Facebook, and of course also on YouTube. You can also do so through my social media platform, that is Achola Simon, across all social media platforms. And today, of course, we'll be discussing peace, and we are very lucky to have great women from this part of the country that have actually been part and parcel of peace-building initiatives in Kisumu, and of course it is environs for years now. And of course on my left is Betty Okero, civil society organization Kisumu, and of course we also have Grace Joey Jobita, domiciled at the office of the woman representative of Kisumu County. We'll be discussing issues starting from the family level all the way up until the national level, things that actually needs to be done to ensure that indeed we foster peace in this particular part of the country. Welcome, ladies. Betty, we go straight to you. Last week, the organization just launched a number of activities in this part of the country. And of course, we tend to see this, we're just having this discussion off air, that we tend to see peace activities or peace-related activities being dealt with quite often just before we go into election. Why is it?
Well, actually, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and good morning to all the listeners out there. Your question is actually very important because it goes to the very basic principle of the idea that conflict only happens during a specific period of time, where perhaps that conflict that we usually see is a culmination of a number of unintended activities that would have been addressed and have not been addressed. So the notion that we only do it towards this year is that it's so closely linked with elections, and yet conflict is much, much more than just what we see in elections. We see conflict happening every single day in different forms. And so the need for us to be able to engage in a conversation around peace means that we start trying to understand the root causes that even leads to that conflict that we usually witness around election period, where we're talking about prevention, giving the impression that it's only elections that creates conflict, whereas election is in itself just another of those episodes where we see a lot of conflict emerging with all the other communities. But it also goes to the fact that during elections, there's a lot of conversation that takes place about what politicians are intending to do. Oh, we're going to make sure you have water, we're going to make sure that your children go to school, we'll make sure that there's food. Those are every single day issues that affect communities. Why wait until we just have a year or two to give the impression that they only emerge at that particular time?
Is it because of the way we pass the message during electioneering period, or is it the way this country has actually been cultured when we're moving towards elections that actually extrapolate these things to what we witness each electioneering year?
Just the way we have decided to design peace activities, peace actions, issues about what communities have that they want to be able to address, and give the impression that it is only elections and the leadership and the people that we put in place, that those are the only people who can sort out those issues, which is not the case. Because if you look at the major conflict that we witnessed in this country, which was during the 2007-2008, all those things that we saw at that time was a culmination of so many unheeded community concerns, so many issues that had been affecting communities from way before. And the elections at that time, the explosion of the conflict that we saw on that time was so many things that people had talked about. It was poverty, it was unemployment, it was exclusion, it was development issues, everything. It was transparency, it was issues around accountability. And we also saw that after that, there was a massive reform in terms of how we were going to start addressing it. You remember the biggest was the fact that we had a new constitution, which was talking about how they were going to make sure that communities are included in development. The whole issue around devolved government was to try and bring services closer. The issues around the 2/3 gender rule was to talk about exclusion. But apart from that, there's a whole concept around public participation, that communities need to be able to be heard, and that our leaders need to hear us. And that the way you hear us is the way you design the programs that address the concerns that we were talking about.
Grace, Betty is just talking about the need to actually remove this conversation from just election, making it periodic, as she puts it, and actually discussing it from the very, very basic level. You are actually very active in terms of ensuring that we start discussing these issues from the very basic level, that is a family unit. Of course, fostering peace in families and ensuring that this thing does not boil out of control and, of course, affect the communities.
Thank you for having me as well. Now, bringing it down to the family level, I think that is where we have to start talking about peace. Because when we talk about capacity building, actually, we're talking about the individual, we're talking about the community, we're talking about the institutions, and also the systems. But then it means that we must start at the household level. Now, there are those simple conflicts that we have at the household. Are they resolved? One. And two, within that household, we have children, we have the women, and of course we have the head of the household, as it is said. But at the end of the day, in case there's a small conflict at the household level, if it is not resolved, it will flow out. If you have another small conflict between families, if it is not resolved, excuse me, then it will flow out into the community. And then at the end of the day, you'll have something happening in the whole country. And that is why there's that polarization that takes place towards election time, because who am I? Am I a Luo? Am I who? Am I who? And then at the end of the day, if we do not resolve it from the household level, then we have a problem. And that is why...
What you say,
yes,
looking at what happens each and every electioneering period, and they're saying that whatever happens in the families, if not handled that carefully, then of course it's likely to spill over. Does it mean that most of these families are broken?
I think if you have been in any board of any school and you're handling discipline, most of the students who have disciplinary issues, and this is on record, are those who are from broken families, and there are very many broken families. Simply because there's a difference between maybe the husband and the wife, and that conflict is not resolved, then the children will suffer. All right? The extended family will be drawn into it, and then everybody else will be drawn into it. But at the end of the day, who suffers? It is that next generation. That is why we are not surprised what happened on 24th of June last year, because they have grown up with conflict within the house. And how do you resolve the conflict? You punch, you shout, you scream, but at the end of the day, we need to go back down into the family level. At the moment, we have something called mediation, and it's really working. If at all there is a problem in the household, let us bring the parties together, let the issue be resolved, and then at the end of the day, the community will also be drawn into it. But if at all we leave the issues of the household unresolved, the community issues unresolved, it will blow out. And then at the end of it, the whole country will have a problem.
The services of mediation just before we get to Betty, how do you get them? Because when you look at communities right now, the demands, I was talking to the two of you just before we went live, and you're telling me you have a series of meetings today. Betty has a series of meetings today because before she goes to Vihiga again for another series of meetings tomorrow, right? Where do we get that time, and where do we get those services in terms of ensuring that indeed we can actually handle issues that are actually affecting the family, so that then they do not get out of hand as they are as we speak?
Again, to the issue of the broken family system. Let me take us back about 20 years ago. There was a time when you had an issue with your spouse or your brother, there was always the elder in the family who would resolve that issue. I know currently we have councils of elders in every community. At the same time, the courts have also given us a reprieve. They have said that if you go to a certified professional mediator who then handles your issues, then that issue is even handled at the court level and it cannot be taken care of beyond that. But at the same time, we have structures within counties. In Kisumu, we have Kisumu Mediation Center. It is next to the Kisumu Law Courts Legal Aid Center. They have a team of more than 600 certified professional mediators. Those who go to court, I always refer to them. But at the same time, at the community level, we have, if you go to the office of the chief or the assistant chief, you get those services. And after they are resolved, they are resolved. But do we recognize those systems? The system is there, yes, but is it recognized? When we talk about conflict and we talk about peace, do we recognize that there is a system that is already in place that can actually take us to that next level, so that we do not go back again and carry guns and carry sticks and carry spears to resolve our small issues? But again, if I go back to what Betty mentioned, there are times when I can have a difference with my neighbor, but it is not my neighbor that I'm having a difference with. It is because I'm having an unresolved issue, maybe with somebody else. I'm just venting. So when it comes down to conflict resolution, and specifically when we are designing capacity building models, then you have to ensure that you identify the root cause of that conflict, and then you handle it, and then inclusion now comes in.
Comes in.
Yes,
Betty. The systems, of course, as she puts it, that those systems need to be actually active and actually operational, so then we can actually get help. But out of the family units, when you come out here, so many things are not actually adding up. And you look at unemployment, you look at sharing of resources. I mean, so many things are not actually happening the way they're supposed to happen. And that is where you guys have been actually actively ensuring that these things are happening.
So I want to respond to you. So I want to go back to something that Jobita said, and start looking at peace in a different spectrum. So for people, peace is development. For people, peace is actually even protesting. For some people, peace is ensuring that even as we are protesting, even as we are demanding, even as we want justice, that you have got an institution that provides that justice. So peace is what we see with the police in terms of how they resolve it. Peace is what we see with the judiciary in terms of how they resolve it. But even peace is how the county government recognizes the marginalization of communities that they're working with, and to see how they can allocate resources that can uplift those who are marginalized, that creates the tensions that we see. So if you imagine at a household level, you've got a parent who is struggling to work. And because we have a system that does not recognize labor laws, they will work even 3 jobs because they have got to put food on the table. So the first thing is that you have abandoned your children, but you need to be able to make sure that you put food on the table, that you educate, that there's money for healthcare. The system must be able to look at the labor laws that continue to misuse and abuse the labor of the people who are working twice as hard, because we are not following labor laws in terms of wages. So we've got to be able to address the structural causes, but we also must also recognize systems. So we have got the chief, but the question is, are they even trained to do the work? One of the challenges we have at community level is trust and respect for those institutions. As a country, there was a time we went through, just following, the promulgation of the Constitution, where we were dismissing the chiefs. And in the process of doing that, we also lowered the way we looked at them in terms of their capacity to be able to ensure that they are able to address and resolve conflict in the community. We have got traditional structures that sometimes we don't recognize. And the reality is that you can do both the informal and the formal. The informal is that you set it up, but the formal is that you make sure that when you're doing that, you're still not going outside by ensuring you allow women in spaces where we have culture and tradition that refuses to talk, but you allow women to express themselves. But you walk in there recognizing those challenges and still protecting the interest. Now, when you talk about, all these institutions that are in place, we know that one of the biggest challenges we have is lack of resources and a capacity. Today, you're recruited as a chief and assistant chief. Tomorrow, you're expected to go and do ADR. Zero capacity to do that. Sometimes they create more conflict and more harm than they do in trying to ensure that they address, and they resolve issues. Not because they're not willing, but because they don't have capacity. So how do we make sure that those structures we have in the community are not just working, but they recognize the presence of other structures that can do that? So we're not also operating in our own specific silos. And then when you look at our diversity as community, we also have our own different cultural norms. How do we recognize all of that when you're trying to resolve conflict in a way that we still build cohesion or strengthen cohesion, but walk out of there saying it is a win-win for everybody? Because one of the challenges we have sometimes when we're dealing with issues around peace is that you think there must be a winner and a loser. And traditional systems don't do that. They recognize that we're still living together, we're still talking to each other. So even as we're addressing it, we address it so that everybody walks away saying, I recognize that I had to give so that we could win. And everybody then walks out of there and we start talking about sustainability. Now, to your question around how do we manage to do all these things that we're doing? I think it is not just us. I think there's so many partners. If you look at the peace landscape right now, you've got your chiefs, you've got your Nyumba Kumi, you've got your community policing, you've got your peace structures. Then you will go to the other level where you've got, state actors, national cohesion, an integration commission. You have got at the national level, the NSC. So we've got all these many platforms, including the Wiano platform that we usually see rolled out during elections, which is so unfortunate because conflict doesn't stop when election ends. But just the fact that we're now using technology to be able to do that. And I've seen innovations where we're now starting to see WhatsApp platforms where people are reporting, or some toll-free numbers where people are reporting. So there are so many activities that are going on, so many groups that are managing, this whole ecosystem of peace and conflict resolution. The question is collaboration and coordination of everybody. The idea that we cannot work together is something that I think becomes extremely difficult when you're talking about conflict in a country, because it doesn't just touch one person. It affects everybody.
Yes, and that is what I wanted to ask, because you look, as you rightly put it, you look at the landscape now. So many organizations, Betty doing this, Jobita doing this, Simon doing that, and all geared towards finding peace or ensuring that, of course, we build capacity in terms of peace. Then the question that begs is that why is it that we don't tend to pull together resources, identify these gaps quite early, or make it a continuous process where we can actually do these activities on a regular basis rather than waiting for some specific time before we actually start rolling out these activities. And then we have so many players. This one is doing this, the other one is doing that. Others actually replicating what already is being done.
Well, actually, the different activities that we are engaging actually address components of peace.
Yes.
So if I'm working in the space of sexual and gender-based violence, when I address that, I'm actually addressing a conflict that emerges.
Yes.
Because somebody is going to be chased away, or somebody is going to lose their life, especially when we're talking about femicide. So by making sure that you've got systems that work, you're actually addressing a conflict within the home. If you look at people who are looking at youth unemployment, they're addressing a trigger that creates conflict, because they're looking at how do we build capacity of young people to engage in gainful employment, whether it's formal or informal. If you look at the programs that we have on children, we are giving them an opportunity to be able to talk about the issues that are affecting them at home, and those are taken up either in the school system in terms of how it works, or in people who are working with mothers, including in church platforms where they start talking about responsibility and giving time. So you will find that all these programs actually talk to the issue around peace. They address what we were talking about, the root causes of conflict. And it might look like we are scattered and we're not coordinated, but we are actually addressing components. When we're talking about leadership, and we're saying women's leadership, we want them around the table so they can say, I know you are saying that you're going to give us water and take over there. But my children wake up every morning, and this is something that the women in Vihiga told me, that we do not want our kids waking up in the morning to go and fetch water in a river, because people are told to go with a jerrycan of water in the villages. And where they go, they are going to be at risk of violence or death or everything. Or we tell children, you must come with firewood. So they are busy hacking trees from their neighbors, creating an unnecessary conflict. So by engaging them in conversations around budgets and development, they're saying, you just take that pipe all the way to the school. It addresses the issue that they're talking about in terms of threats that kids are having. Or why aren't we doing a biodigester over here? When we are able to do that, it addresses the whole issue around, energy and climate justice, So when women start talking about development from their own basic experience, we are trying to address the conflict that would emerge in the event that is not addressed. And if we start looking at that holistically, then you start understanding the conversation. Now the question is that the people who are planning, do they recognize why this conversation is important? If we're training young people and saying, we are giving you the skills, what corresponding action are we putting in place to make sure that they're able to get certain work? If we're talking about 30% for young people, how do you make sure that these people who we have trained have access to 30%? And access is not giving me a tender. Access is giving me the tender and making sure you pay me on time. So you've got to start looking at all the parts that create the whole.
That actually create the whole board. The question then that I would just piggyback on that is the fact that we do much in terms of creating capacity, ensuring that the youth and people living with disabilities understand that there's 30% for you. Also ensuring that we tell them that it's good to live in peace with their neighbors and all sorts of things around peace. But what happens when we are getting to some situations like elections and we want to have our cake and keep it at the same time, where I forget that this is my neighbor. We need to look at identify specifics that we need from leaders, and I start looking at Betty as a person who comes from my community, a person who is my friend, and forget about my friend whom we've actually been suffering for the last 10 years.
Before, let me mention, just add on to something that she mentioned earlier. Now, the current conflict that we don't even know how to handle are the Gen Zs. But within Kisumu, there is another conflict, that is again coming up, and that is involving the border sector, and it is very serious. Now, why are we having these conflicts? One, because, especially for the border, is because there is that tough war, that this is our area, this is not your area. Now, it all boils down, territorial, it all boils down to resources, because that is basically the underlying cause of most of the conflict that we're having. Now, you mentioned something about PWDs, you mentioned youth, you mentioned others. Now, one of the key concerns that is actually emerging at the moment is that we're having millions of youth that are not gainfully engaged, and they're idle. And they have all these gadgets that they can use to rally others behind them, all right? Now, one of the things that I know most of the officers are doing is to find a way of ensuring that, one, they get some skills, and then two, they are linked to employment. Now, the biggest employer at the moment is affordable housing, and everybody's talking about it. Everybody's talking about it.
In Kisumu, is actually the main bus terminus, eh?
The biggest.
Yes.
One of the things that we are now advocating for is to ensure that those young men who have gained those technical skills, how do we ensure that they are part of that, to gain that experience? So when they go out there and they're given that 30%, they're actually able to deliver. Yeah? And we are now saying also that for women, it is not about when you go to a TVET, unaenda sijui unafanya salon, sijui unafanya hotel, unafanya nini. No, it's not just about hospitality. They're also going for technical subjects. And during the last Gen Z process, it was actually the women who were more aggressive. I don't know whether you noticed. More aggressive. One of them even went and lifted the helmet from one of the police officers and said, now do your worst. Yeah. So there is that aggression that is also building among the women, and they're saying, you cannot leave us behind. Yeah, in this conversation we must be part of it. But at the same time, how much are we engaging the young people to ensure that they are so busy and at the end of the day they are so tired that they just want a bed to sleep on?
Grace, that is
Okay.
just before you.
Exhausted because we don't want them to.
Because one, we want them to be part of developing the country, yeah, in a way that is positive. But at the same time, we are saying that let them start thinking in terms of what they are doing. That if I'm part of the affordable housing, na hii naenda kuisha, where do I go next?
Yeah. Grace, that is where I asked a question. That is where I asked that question. Is that we have actually built the capacity of this youth in the community, right? We have ensured that they've actually gained skills. We have talked to them about corruption. We've actually talked to them about the importance of peace. But what happens in situations where now we are going into an election and we know some of these policies, some of these development records are actually tied on the people that we actually elect? Why are we not seeing this transitioning from just having this conversation into actual deeds of electing sound leaders that will actually take this country to the next level?
I think because I work in a political office, I think I can answer that question very well.
Yes.
Betty,
that is what you said.
I cool my horses because I'm going to come for you.
I know. Now, I don't want to speak on behalf of Her Excellency Ruth Odinga, but I can tell you that at the moment, what we are doing is actually targeting that youth. Yeah, we have this amount that is set aside for bursary. We have said that no, we are not going to pay for secondary school. We allow the MPs to do that. We allow the county to do that, and the others. Ours is specifically for technical subjects for the young people, and we take about 600 to 800 every year for those trainings. Now, when they have finished the training, we give them the tools that they need to start their work. But at the same time, now with the affordable housing here, what we have been doing is we have been pushing, and I don't know whether you noticed recently, we actually took a certain number. We took masons, we took welders. Now we're going to take also those who have done electrical engineering. But what we're also saying is that we do not forget about food, and that is farming. We have also partnered with the seed companies, and we have brought the youths together in their groups, and we are saying that this is the best way you can get the most from this piece of land. Why are we doing all that? We are engaging them. Because at the end of the day, I'm a mother. I have sons, I have daughters who have finished school. You cannot continue carrying that burden. Yeah? You want to get to a point where you tell them now, because Luos in the past, the moment you become a man, you go and beat your own home. So we're also saying now, when you've reached 18, we've taken you through college, you have everything you need. Now go out there and also start your own family and also do your business. But we cannot continue carrying that burden. So even we as mothers, we are saying that let that be the trend. Let our children be trained. Let them be equipped. But at the same time, let us identify opportunities where they can be engaged. Most of them are saying that now, mimi nafanya kazi ya internet. You know, I'm always online, I'm always working, I'm always, I'm working remotely. But is that healthy for them even? Why is it that when we were in school, I remember when I went to nursery school, okay, I didn't go to nursery school. I went one day and I went home. When I went to class 1, we would be in school from 10 o'clock to 12. And then you go back home.
50% will be playing.
You'll be playing and running around.
You'll actually be
social skills.
By the time you get to class 3, you only go to school up to 10 o'clock. Then another, now the class 1s now come in. And then you just play. Yeah. And even at home, there was that time that, okay, you go and play, but come back at this time. And there were always playgrounds that were set aside in every estate. Why? For children to play. Today, for me to get my grandchildren out to go and play, it is war. Because I know there is a TV, there is a gadget, there is a what, but you have to get them out to play. Fortunately, I live in a homestead and we have cows to milk and we have goats to graze. So it's a bit different. I don't know about Betty, but for me it's a bit different. Okay? So at the end of it all, some things have changed, all right? But we need to change with them. Now, recently, as I finish and I hand over to Betty, we hosted the International Day of Peace. There were several build-up activities. They all had meaning, but I do not know whether we understood the meaning. The first one was we had this intergenerational discussion. Why are we talking to everyone when it comes to peace? Why are we talking to the Gen Zs? In the old days, it was only the old men who would close the door, talk, and then decide, and then wanakata wanakata kondoo. I don't know how that one is said in English, but it's like they come to a level of agreement. Then after that, there was the element of now tree planting. First, there was art. All right? Yeah. Why are we sharing our culture? Why are we sharing what we do? All right? And sports. And then there was the tree planting. And I passed sports ground the other day and they are wilting. We need to do something about that. Yeah. So there was tree planting. Then at the end of it all, we had that interdenominational prayer. And then we released the doves. Each of those activities had a meaning. It is almost like you are designing a training module and you are ensuring that at the end of it all, everybody will understand where they have come from and where they are going. My only concern was, I wish this was done in a conflict area, so that it is the 2 or 3 parties who are involved in these activities. When you bring it to the middle of Kisumu city, where really there is no conflict, then what are we saying? Are we really meeting that objective? Yeah, I'll leave Betty with that.
You have given Betty flowers because for a very long time, including the last general election, of course, Kisumu was one of the counties that was actually flagged as potential hotspots, right? So you are saying that Betty has done a lot in terms of fostering peace in this county. But Betty, too many weaklings, as she's actually rightly put it, right? You have trained this youth. We have trained this youth in different fields. We have issues of climate. We have family issues, and we have talked to this, basically the community. Yeah. Too many weak links in terms of one, there's tribe, 2, there's poverty, and it's so easy in terms of swaying the thinking of the community towards a certain direction. How then do we ensure that we cover these weak links so that then people can actually start thinking from the perspective of we want to move this region or this country to a different level, rather than saying that I would prefer to have someone else so I prefer to have this person because he comes from my community, from my clan, from my village, and actually forgetting about the integrity that we are supposed to look at in terms of ensuring that we are having good leaders who are actually going into the office with the sole purpose of ensuring that they initiate issues that are actually going to affect the common mwananchi.
Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so I want to start.
You can handle a lot.
I hope so. I'll try and respond as best as I can. For me, I want to start by saying we have to start looking at citizens as resources and not as problems. And when you do that, you start having programs that are sustainable. We looked at young people as a problem. That's why we had Kazi Mashinani, short term. Let's make them so tired that they do not have energy to do anything, you know. And if so you had Kazi Mashinani, and you will also recognize it's also episodial, because then when we see that there's a lot of noise, then we also come up with a problem solver. So we've got to start looking at citizens as resources, and if you do that, it means you start looking at the infrastructure that we have put in place as opportunity for growth, development, and change in family. Look at our industries. Those industries were doing massive in terms of the support they were giving to families. Family unit, you're able to feed your children, you're able to take them to school, you're able to live a decent life. Anywhere, look at all our industries. We are deliberately collapsing them. But what you're actually doing is you're creating what we're now saying is a problem. And this problem is actually a creation of a lack of, one would say, deep thinking of the state in how we start looking at our citizens, irrespective of where they come from, as resources. If you go to Northeastern, there is a resource that they're engaged in. Support it, elevate it. So you actually have young people engaged in an activity that generates income, benefiting from all these other things that we're talking about. So why don't we have a meat processing? Take them to college, train them on how to do that. Why is it that we're still not able to add value to our sugarcane? Where is the technical training to be able to do that? We can literally create income and create opportunities for jobs if we were serious about how we look at our fellow citizens. But you know what we've done? We are now enemies because we are not in whatever political party, or you didn't vote for me, so we create enemies from citizens for actually exercising their democratic right. So when we see that, we start then aligning ourselves with people who make the loudest noise because you think they speak for you. And they're saying the things that are affecting you. And you're like, this person gets me, this person gets me. But you have young people who have said, no, we're not going to do that. Gen Z protests did not happen in a vacuum. They started by having the conversation. Can you please make sure you do not pass the finance bill? Can we talk about the finance bill? Can we Yani, there was a whole conversation going on before they went to the streets, and that's how I was saying that when you look at peace, you must also recognize that protest is a form of peace. They are going to the streets to engage with you because that is the only platform you've given them to engage. Now, how you respond is now when we talk about, do you see your citizens as enemies or do you see them as resources? And if you continue to see them as enemies, you will have the sort of conflict that we're always seeing. So now we have divided our country now with elections. I don't know which political party you belong to. If you're not in the mix of it, you are useless people who have decided that they're eating. You know, that whole conversation is when our communities have borrowed the government language and are actually starting to demonize, ethnicize, polarize, marginalize fellow citizens, though their suffering is the same.
How do you pull back the power to wananchi? Get it from these people who actually stand on the podium and say, watu ni wabaya, mi nitafanya hivi, nitawafanyia hivi na hivi. So then people can actually start, as Gen Z, had that power during, of course, the build up to their demonstrations, right? How then do we actually get that power back to Mwananchi? So then we have a sober discussion.
Actually, Gen Z did have the power. They had the power when they were sharing information.
Yes.
They had the power when they're saying we don't like this because it's going to do that.
Down, right? So the question is that how do we get that power back to the people? So then we build that conversation.
I don't think that's the narrative that we have. They are operating in their own spaces, and you can see it happening. You know, when people decide that we're not going to go to the streets, that's a decision that they have made. That is their power at that particular point, saying they can or they cannot. Yesterday, I think there was this Kaluma boy, and there was everybody. Yes, Nyeri. And people went. That's Gen Z showing their power in the most empathetic way. And I think somebody said, we're not getting it, but these young people are getting it, and they're organizing and they're mobilizing. But what are we doing? We are now going to start creating systems that do not allow. So we come up with things like, you can't meet in a place unless you get permission. We will not give you permission to. So when you start having those barriers that are put in place, that is you looking at your citizens once more as enemies and not as resources. Able to tap into that conversation and see how you can be able to address it. Now, young people are talking. The question is, we're not listening because you're saying, how do we tap into that power? They are speaking. They're not doing conventional speaking. They're speaking on social media. We don't get social media, so we think there's a problem. In fact, what are we trying to do? Oh, we're trying to protect that space by coming up with requests about how they can engage. That in itself is seeing citizens as enemies and not as a resource. We need to start listening to each other. We need to be able to walk into a place without having cards under the table. And it's scary that you can sit around the table and people tell you where you're wrong. You've got to be big enough to be able to recognize that, look, people's interests, people's challenges, people's issues are so different that I need to listen to you. We're not questioning your ability. We're telling you, you did that, it didn't work for us. Perhaps you should do it in a different way. Now, if we don't listen, is when we start having those pockets of conflict because we're not listening. And Kenya doesn't listen to each other. We don't. We wait until there's a massive, then we start saying, okay, now come, let's talk. We had, and we've done different ways. Please remember that even the conflict that we've had in this country, we've had political solutions. I mean, Kenya has had 2 handshakes, and now we've got this other broad engagement that is going on. That is one. But we also have ways in which we engage with young people through sports, through art, through music, through drama. Even sometimes we don't like the things that children are saying. So we even punish children for telling you, this is what we want. We have got to stop becoming sensitive to truth, because that's what it is. That when I'm telling you what is affecting me, you come and shut it down with the cops. And that's what that does, is you move the conversation from daylight into the dark. And what happens in the dark is that you have no idea what's happening. And then in Alipuka. Yes.
So we tend to grapple around that. Yes. Betty.
I wanted to answer your question. How do we pull back that part? One, we attended a function with her of young people. And there was this young lady from Hope Rekindled who was asking the young people, what are the roles of the office of the women rep? What are the roles of your MP? And it was surprising, they could actually not fully answer what their roles were. So for me, the first answer is that we need to do a very integrated and aggressive civic education. Let people understand that I have this power, but how do I translate this power to answer for me so that my needs can be met, whether in the next government or this one? Yeah. So because at times when you have the power and you don't know how to use it, at the end of the day, it doesn't help you.
Yeah. All
right? Now, also, we recently conducted an activity that brought out a gap that exists, and Betty mentioned it a bit, that between the Gen Zs and our generation, there's a very big gap, and the gap is just the phone, digital. We don't understand a lot. I may have the phone, but I don't know really much that I can do with it. But the young people can play around with it, send out the information is received, and they can mobilize themselves to do great things. At the moment, from today, people are registering as voters. There has been a silent message that has been going out, that let us go out, and the Gen Zs are actually registering as voters. That means that something has shifted, and the way we do things will not be the same. It's not business as usual now. Because even for us,
to get them to actually vote.
To actually vote. No, from the way organized. If at all a voice, one of their voices tells them, go there and vote and make this choice, they're going to make it. But at the same time, for us who are sitting in those spaces, how do we tap into that potential and ensure that it is directed correctly, so that at the end of the day, the whole country benefits from it, so that we do not have somebody again put in office who has no idea, where left is and where right is. Now, we were talking about political parties and all. I'm a life member of ODM. I mean, you have to be affiliated to something, all right? But the reason why I can speak for ODM is because we have been there. Hata kama Betty anatuona ni kama we have actually delivered quite a bit to the people of Kenya, And being that we could be the oldest political party that is still breathing and kicking and not on life support, that is also, we can also say something about that.
I expect you to say the largest party in the southern part of, yes.
But at the same time, that political parties have got their own role. Civil society organizations have their own roles. But now how do we come together and ensure that the objective is the same? We have one vision. How do we ensure that the different objectives that we are engaging in, at the end of the day, we have a peaceful Kenya that creates the right environment for development, that a mama mboga will know that I will go to the market in the evening, I will sell my wares, but I will not be afraid. I will come back home. Because areas of conflict, there is no development. Areas of conflict, the women suffer most.
Exactly.
And it is only that we do not have time to talk about that.
Yeah, true.
But the aspect of who suffers most in case there is no peace, that is another conversation that we need to have.
I think I want to just clarify on one thing. The political settlements, when we have conflict, some of it have been extremely useful. And I will not forget I think it was the 2017, when we saw just how vicious a response there was in the country from the people with the levels of power, and how the community in this region suffered, not to mention the fact that peace without justice is also just a temporary peace. Yes. So there's that. But I think also in terms of civic education, we have moved civic education from physical space to virtual. And the thing about the use of technology in the way young people are mobilizing themselves is that you do not need all this protocol observed, and you don't need to go through all that. They're doing it in their way, and I think that's important. But I like the fact that how do we support, how do we advise, and how do we shape? Not coming to impose, but working together to be able to make sure that we achieve the end game. But I tell you, even in terms of capacity building, I have seen how young people are training themselves. Look, every single day you will find there's a conversation going on in our Twitter spaces. And they're just training and educating and talking and sharing.
That's exactly what they're
Sure.
Yes.
If you want to understand that, they're also quite keen about what's happening in the country. The day they released the repayments of SHA, within what? 3 days, we were able to know.
The very day, in fact, the conversation was actually around which institutions and what the yes.
They kept just unleashing and unleashing. And again, that is the power of just how they have decentralized themselves in a way that, you know, whether we accept it or not, they already have existing networks, and it is important. Yeah.
Betty, just in conclusion, because our 1 hour is already done. Yes, it was fast. Jobita, you work in a political office, right? And one of the issues that have actually been raised over and over again has been about the language that politicians actually use. You are the handlers of politicians. How do you change that narrative? How do you change that language so that then we speak the language that actually unites Kenya rather than dividing people along tribal and clan and community lines? Just in 1 minute, so that then we get to it and we conclude.
Yes, I'm glad that Excellency Ruth Odinga has been very candid and very forthright when it comes to languages that are used. And she's one of those who have really been advocating for being sober. When you are talking, be sober. But at the same time, I think it's time when the other politicians also had a vision. Because, you know, when you have a clear vision and you know what you want to achieve, and what your vision is related to the citizens. Like Betty said, let us serve the people, all right? So if you do that, you'll not use that language that again brings conflict. You'll want to bring in as many people as possible into one basket so that you are able to maybe get their votes. But when you polarize, so that maybe you can find your barabara ya katikati, at the end of the day, things don't get better, they actually get worse. So I think what I can say out there is that let us use that language that brings people together. Let us use that language that ensures that peace prevails so that development can find room.
Thank you.
Right?
Betty,
Yes.
Betty, integrity. As we conclude, just one minute in terms of as we go into, as we have this conversation around peace and everything, integrity is key. And not just about resource utilization, but integrity in each and every aspect of leadership.
Talk about integrity in a very interesting
1
way.
minute.
1 minute. So integrity is saying that if you call me to the table and you listen to me, integrity is protecting what I say. Integrity is listening that there are marginalized people that need to be lifted so we are equal. And that you recognize that that is a fact and that you do something about it in a way that it is sustainable. Integrity is about allowing me to express myself in a way that you do not tell me that I speak, but there's almost like a gun behind my back. So integrity is participation. It is decision making that is inclusive. But most of all, it is in realizing that if I'm talking to you and I have an issue, your response is going to be seen in how you make sure that I'm able to say I am happy. Yeah.
Fantastic. Betty Okero, civil society organization, Kisumu, and of course Grace Jobita. They're telling me that, of course, that 1 hour was not enough. Would have wished, of course, to have this conversation about 2 hours and even more. But of course, we are time restricted. Of course, we are glad that you'll actually find time to have to be part and parcel of this conversation. We want to thank them of course, for finding time to actually come here, of course, what they're actually doing on the ground in terms of just ensuring that peace actually prevails in this region. This is a conversation that, of course, will continue on our social media platforms, as I've said. And, of course, this is a conversation that you can actually take it to the very basic level of our community in terms of talking to your brother, talking to your sister, talking to your friend, to ensuring that indeed we focus on ensuring that there's peaceful coexistence, but also we put our leaders to our account. We are very grateful to the management of the Miraja Palace Hotel here in Kisumu for again affording us this chance to actually hold this program in their premises.